For the Interrobang, I'm Jack Sutton. For this week's issue of the Interrobang, it'll be the London local issue. So you'll be able to pick up a copy of the Interrobang and read all about the London community and issues that London is facing. Now, on that note, I thought that for today's podcast, we could take a look at the municipality of London from a political standpoint. So we have for our guest today, Glen Morgan. He was my class's politics teacher last year. Excellent teacher. One of the things that was really great about Glen's class was whether you had an interest in politics already and background knowledge, or you knew nothing about it, there was something everyone could take from his course, a lot of conversation. So I thought today we'll share him with you. All right, so hi, Glen.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Good. So one of the things that you mentioned in our class multiple times is that people don't understand the difference between the municipal level, the provincial level, and the federal level in Canada. So let's take a look first at what is a city in Canada, or in Ontario. I don't know if it's maybe different by province. What is the city responsible for? What does a city do?
So you can look at cities. You can also look at local politics, even sometimes on a county level. Anybody who's been driving around here, you might see, municipality of Central Elgin. So when you look at any smaller subdivision, below the province, you start to look at that community as a group of people, and the government and politics that is focused on that level really predominantly deals with your day-to-day living. How your garbage gets picked up. Do you have access to a library? Do you have public transportation? All of these things are, for the most part, managed at the municipal level, and a lot of people don't really realize how important their local governments are.
How do you think the voter turnout is for municipal elections? Because, like you said, a lot of people don't even realize kind of what they do. I think some people don't even really pay attention to the fact that they exist.
Traditionally, if you look at when elections get held, if it's a big change election, federal turnout can be really high, provincial can also be high, can be mediocre as well. Traditionally, local politics, unless there's a really, really big juicy story going on, voter turnout, to put it bluntly, sucks. Not enough people get really involved. A lot of times they don't know who their candidates are. And other than maybe the mayor, like the top of the ticket, so to speak. And traditionally, if you look at a lot of local elections, if the same person runs again, if they want to get their position back, they often get reelected just because people who go out to vote go, oh yeah, I remember that name, check. And that happens way too frequently.
Yeah, how long was it Fontana, the mayor of London? He was mayor for a long time?
He was mayor for a long time, but I'm even thinking of people, not so much mayor, because the mayor can show up in local news often enough that they might get a whiff of scandal around them or a dislike. But a local ward councillor can go 3, 4, 5, 6. They can spend, almost a lifetime on a city council.
Yeah, and as years go by, it's better and better money every time. They even were looking just this year at upping those some of those salaries.
Yeah, London's an interesting city, though, on that, because for the longest time when I was living here for a number of years, London local councillors, other than the mayor, the councillors were always considered, this was a part-time job. They would work elsewhere. A city like Toronto, on the other hand, councillors are expected to be, that's your full-time role. How big does a city have to get to warrant full-time councillors? Some people would argue that London has kind of reached that point. You're looking at a city of almost 500,000 people.
Mm-hmm. And council themselves certainly are feeling that way as well. I interviewed the deputy mayor at some point this summer when they were talking about those salaries, and he said that same thing. He said, we're growing as a city. This is a full-time job now. So council, it's a big job, and like you said, they deal with a lot of different things that affect your day-to-day life that sometimes just go, and they kind of get away scot-free with a lot of things because people just don't pay attention to it.
Unless you're really immersed into local media, you will miss a lot of things. And local media, I think, is weaker now than it used to be. You look at our local newspaper, the London Free Press, is owned by a national conglomerate. It's not really a local publication the way it was when, to be frank, when I was a kid. And a lot of news now is found locally via social media. And I'll get this one plug in. You can see with things happening in the United States, stories that show up on social media, i.e., cats and dogs being eaten in Springfield, not always a true story when you're reading it on social media as opposed to a legitimate local media source.
So, yeah, just for the viewers, most of the things in your day-to-day life are being decided by the city council here. So it's a group of city councilors. I believe there are 14, I think, and the mayor, as well as a whole staff of clerks, legal people, things like that. So let's get into some of those issues that they deal with that are specific to London that may be affecting your day-to-day life. Let's start with one that everybody loves to hate, which is transit.
Absolutely.
What do you think of London Transit?
As somebody who went back and did a couple of my degrees later in life, when my wife and I only had one car, I bussed from my townhouse to UWO to finish off a master's degree and stuff like that. Was not a fan of it then. And again, you look at London, a city of 500,000 people. Sure, they got in the bus rapid transit. They tried to put in those dedicated bus lanes, but you still often look at them and you're still stuck on roads like Wonderland, which has a number of lights any time of the day that you're on it. Road congestion in this city is just horrendous at times, and you can have as many buses, you can have the density and everything, but if it's still hard to get around, it's still hard to get around.
Yeah, I saw a article recently, I think it was in CBC, that said last month, so I don't know if they're referring to August then or maybe for the month of September, over 50% of all buses in the city were delayed. And like you said, I mean, it's congested. It's not all up to them, but...
Yeah, it's not like the bus is breaking down. It's not like the driver is going too slow or something like that. If a bus is delayed, it's due to all the other traffic that's on the road. Credit where credit is due, living here for the number of years that I did, the underpass at Adelaide being built was a major improvement because of how often things got stuck there. Helps for the bus that's on that road at this point. But it's still, this is not an easy city to get around. I often joke, I moved to St. Thomas about 5-6 years ago, and I lived at the Fanshawe, Adelaide area before I moved. And when I would come here to work, it would take maybe 15, 20 minutes, depending on traffic, to drive here. I drive from St. Thomas now to Fanshawe on average in 25 to 30 minutes. So I tripled my distance, but barely added 10 minutes onto my commute time. That just seems to indicate that, moving around this city is not the greatest thing.
No, and it's not good. And you mentioned the Adelaide underpass. It's amazing. That's the route I take to and from school, and it has been life-changing. But other than that, it's as London continues to grow, what more? There's only so much that the city can do, right? I mean, you can't just start widening every single already very wide street, tearing up sidewalks and lawns. What do you think they can really do to help with things like congestion?
Honestly, I really couldn't tell you the answer at this point.
Neither
now.
can they, apparently. So.
Yeah, the era of, you go back long enough, 20, 25 years, and always talking about a ring road or an expressway through the city, and I kind of wonder if that ship has sailed. I can't imagine any throughway that you would pick now to convert into an expressway through the city. We're not at the point where anybody's ever going to even promote the idea of a subway system here. But and to do light rail now, I know that was the idea about a decade ago or 15 years ago, but now the land expropriation that would be required for that is kind of intense as well.
Yeah, and I feel like people would be a lot more vocal about their anger if the city decided to repossess some of their front lawn or the boulevard or something. No, and it's crazy, and people are already pissed off about even the construction we have now. Imagine if they tried to put in a ring I would shut down the city for years.
I I don't know what will happen with the foresight. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, digressing from the city a little bit, I just saw this today on Globe and Mail that Ford apparently wants to dig a big tunnel under the 401 to relieve some congestion or something like that. To be honest, I didn't read the article
Okay,
yet.
I missed that one, so I'm not going to comment without
Here,
without initially seeing it.
let me pull up the headline at least, just because
Okay.
it was. Yeah, it said, breaking news, Premier Doug Ford vows to dig massive tunnel under Highway 401 to address congestion.
Was that in the Beaverton?
No, Globe and
Okay,
Mail.
Globe and Mail. All right.
Globe and Mail.
Because you'd hear a
Serious
line like
journalism.
that, and you'd almost think, really? I mean, Toronto's bad enough in and
Yeah.
of itself. I have to drive through it to take my daughter to university in Peterborough. But again, once you hit a certain level, and this is an issue for municipalities and municipal government. Granted, Toronto has a lot of overlap with provincial issues. But once you hit a certain population level, if you don't do that foresight in planning, and that's what municipal governments are responsible for, you wind up with issues of urban sprawl, local transit issues, housing issues that become a bigger, instead of being proactive, you're now being reactive, effectively.
Yeah. So basically, transit in all its forms it's not just a London issue. It's all kinds of cities. As cities grow, as we get more and more people coming to Canada, more cars on the road. So let's take a look at another big issue here that we all see on the streets every day when we walk through this city, and that's the homelessness crisis. Now, I think this is a bit of a tricky one because whose responsibility is it really? The municipality is doing stuff, the province is doing stuff. I don't really know what the federal government is doing, but where would you lay most of the responsibility for this?
So, federal is probably going to be the least responsible on an issue of housing and homelessness. That being said, you have also heard of federal programs in terms of promoting housing at levels, funding. Obviously, at the federal level, we have costs related to the Bank of Canada, interest rates. I can't say they're completely detached from it, but if you're looking at just boots on the ground dealing with people who need a place to stay, it is predominantly local. If you're looking at funding to get a shelter set up, whether it's through charitable donations, whether it's through any type of provincial grant, like I mentioned province, which would flow down to the municipal level, you often look at the city or the locality to deal with the issue. There is some degree of responsibility on the provincial level, but I think for the most part, yeah, when people really look at that problem, they often think of their local government.
Okay. So, I mean, we've seen the city attempting to do quite a few things to combat that problem. There's the hub system, there's shelters, and things like that. But it doesn't seem to be helping that much. What are your thoughts on the city's response to it, how it's been so far? Is there anything you'd like to see them doing better?
It's often weird, like as we were just mentioning with transit and getting around the city, what can you see to be done? In terms of the homeless issue, what can you see to be done? A lot of people will balk at the idea of, they'll just say, you're just throwing money at a problem. It's a Band-Aid solution. And in many cases, it may be. So a lot of times you have to look at what is the root cause of people being homeless at the moment. Is it lack of housing? Again, with the higher influx of immigration over the last couple of years, is it just a shortage? These people are here to study or work. They generally have some degree of income, so that you can look at, are there enough buildings? Mm-hmm. On the other side of the issue, you might look at drug issues, mental health issues. So for those people who truly have a difficult time obtaining a stability in their life where they can have a job, get enough income where they could have, make rental payments, on that level, it's not just housing, but we have to look at issues of drug abuse, mental health issues. And decades ago, there were much larger, much more regulated mental health hospitals across the province, and it got downloaded and became much more outpatient services. Not to say that there weren't problems with mental health facilities 20, 30 years ago and abuses that went on there, but not having them now is also
Yeah, we're seeing the effect of that.
so, which would house people with mental health issues who needed that ongoing care, treatment, medications, and everything. So your question is valid. It's huge, and I'm glad I am not a politician running for office who would have to answer that
Yep.
in a tangible way, because it is a very difficult question to answer.
Well, it is, and you mentioned mental health facilities that closed down. Actually, I grew up for a time in Orillia, Ontario, where there was a very large
Okay.
mental health institution that was shut down, I believe, in the 90s. And from what I understand, some of those patients were just left out onto the street. And we had huge problems
close,
in the city
yeah.
for years. It was horrible. And there were, like you said, so many abuses that happened in those systems. It was the approach that we took for decades to mental health was just horrible.
Yeah.
But I'm seeing a conversation come back around now, around these institutions, and I mean, I would like to think a way to revamp it in a more ethical way. But that would come down to the province, wouldn't it?
Yes. So when you're talking about healthcare funding, that's absolutely a provincial responsibility. And to focus, um, there's been a lot of criticism of the Ford government over the last number of years in terms of how much healthcare funding is there? Where is it going into proper? Is it going into the proper areas? Uh, I think when I was the professor for your class, I often joked the one portfolio you do not want to be given if your party wins the election is Minister of Health. I do not think there has been any popular Minister of Health for as long as I can remember. It is such a tough portfolio to manage here.
Yeah, and I guess that goes for any political party too. It doesn't matter who it is or what their ideas are. It's one. I think it's one of those areas where every person living in this country can see the failures. They can see what's going on and what's working and what's not. And it's very easy to just point that finger at whoever is in that position.
There's a huge issue going on right now with healthcare, and there was, I believe it was also in the Globe and Mail, there was a Globe and Mail, maybe Toronto Star, an article about what doctors get paid in Ontario, and it was focused on family medicine. So a family doctor has to hire a staff, manage an office. They don't get the regular pension. They have to set aside their own money for pension and retirement and everything. People often think, yeah, doctor, great job. Depends. If you're working in a hospital as a surgeon, as a specialist, maybe. In some cases, it's better off. So a lot of doctors have banded together to pool resources. And anybody who's lucky enough to have a doctor, and I know many don't, you get rostered as one of their patients. Well, if an emergency hits you and it's a Friday night or a weekend and you can't wait for an appointment,
I
you're
know where
not
you're going.
supposed to go to a walk-in clinic because your family doctor says, well, if you go to the walk-in clinic, we're going to deroster you. Or if you go to the ER. And so you don't want to go to a walk-in clinic, you go to the ER. And then we
Congestion.
congest our ERs and everything. So yeah, you're bringing up so many issues. This is not an easy province or an easy city to live in right now. And there are issues out there, but I'm hoping this will help people realize these are big issues. And if somebody comes up with a really good idea, don't get yourself locked into ideologies. Like, vote for ideas, vote for policies, vote for things where, wow, this just might make things better.
Yeah. And what you said there about don't get yourself locked in ideologies. That is a big thing that I've just been thinking about lately. In the Interrobang issue that's coming out, the London local one, I did write an opinion piece about the homelessness issue and the response to it. I'm hoping I don't ruffle too many feathers with it because I do speak my mind. But one of the things that I said in it is these big issues, it's impossible to have like a constructive conversation about what we can actually do because they've become, and I think I used the phrase ideological purity tests. If you're on this side, this is your opinion and this is the response to it, nothing else. And if you're on this side, it's the opposite, and there's no discussion of anything. This works, this doesn't, let's change this. And I think it's so evident, especially in the homelessness issue as well. But yeah, we can't seem to solve these issues if no one's willing to talk about them and open their minds and think about what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, I think people might get into a traditional outlook. You look at right-wing conservatism tends to be, lower taxes, laissez-faire economy, that type of thing. The more you go to the left, liberal or small L liberal, social policies, democratic socialism or social welfare state, taxes are more readily accepted. So any idea which may be put forth, as I mentioned earlier, throwing money at something, you may get initial pushback from a right wing. They may not come up with those ideas, where the left wing may be more amenable to something that would increase taxes. But everything at some point needs to be on the table. It's why for a long time, centrist parties were the ones most likely to get elected, because they tended to be a little bit more pragmatic on things. But as we look at Canada now, centrist parties may not be as strong as they once were. The federal liberals don't tend to look as centrist as they used to. That being said, on the municipal level, nobody is supposed to be enmeshed into party politics. You get a little bit in Toronto, and sure, you might look at some people on London City Council and go, oh, you've got a connection to the NDP, or oh, you had a connection to the Conservatives, but they never run under a party banner. Municipal politics is supposed to be free of party partisanship.
Yep, ideally, of course. Now, I think of that as, I look at the city councillors and I'm like, well, you vote for one party or the other and you support one or the other. So there's no, I guess there's no way to completely remove kind of partisan politics from, the minds and hearts of these politicians.
Right.
But yeah, that's completely true. Officially.
Yeah, you'll get those voting blocks, and I can remember under you mentioned Fontana earlier, and you would tend to get those people who were, blue liberals or that centrist or maybe a little bit center right, and they became a voting block. And then you had you'll hear a progressive members of city council who may form a slightly more left-leaning voting block. So you will get those little blocks in terms of overall political ideology and views, but they won't technically put a party label to it, even though you can kind of guess what it is.
Kind of guess, yeah. All right, so moving on, another issue in London, and this has been discussed a lot this week at the council meeting on Tuesday. Building heights have been discussed. At Tuesday's council meeting, they actually decided that on what they call like neighborhood connector roads, which are like Wortley Road, Cheapside, Aldersbrook, some of these big major streets, they're now going to allow the building of 4-story stacked townhouses. So much denser housing, but not too much, not like 50-story condos. But the hope there is that it's going to alleviate some of the stress on the housing market. Now, anyone watching this, if you've looked for an apartment in this city, you might be finding that a one-bedroom apartment is going to cost you $1,500–1,600. So this is a way that hopefully the goal is to maybe bring that down a little bit, supply and demand, all of that. Some people in this city, a lot of people in this city, are not on board with it.
And I understand why. So does it have the potential to alleviate some of the housing crunch that's here? Sure. The moment you actually managed to get housing put up, and I think the developers have said that it's actually easier and in some cases faster to get some of these stacked townhouses built as
It would make
opposed
sense.
to, yeah. So get it put up faster, get the density in the area increased, and sure, that should take some pressure off the housing issue here. But you're increasing urban density in what we talked about earlier, a city that doesn't necessarily have the public transit or roadway infrastructure to manage a lot more people in a particular area. So is it a good idea from a housing standpoint? Sure, potentially. Is it a good idea from a, will it make it easier to get around this city? Potentially not, without some significant planning going on with it. I don't know enough about the planning and the analysis to say 100% whether it's going to work or not. Because I think this is one of those things where there's too many issues. Sorry, I shouldn't say too many. There's multiple issues that are going to affect how successful it is.
Yeah, like anything, I think that the city does. It's really a wait and see. We'll find out how effective it is.
To a certain extent, yeah. There's only a few things I can remember in London that it's like, wow, that actually worked out well. And I shouldn't be that negative, but
I can't think of any so far.
I'm still going to admit the Budweiser Gardens, in terms of an entertainment center for downtown, was a good investment.
Yeah.
It would have been nicer if the city got more direct profit off of it, as opposed to, I guess, what was it? Sending the management of it out to a third party type thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe it could have been better on that, but I remember it enhanced the vibrancy of the downtown. So sometimes things do progress in the city. It just isn't always.
And it seems like the downtown core is the place where they have much more freedom to progress and to try out new things. But like we mentioned with these kind of townhouses and these other neighborhoods, of course, in London we have the NIMBYs. So we're talking about the NIMBYism,
Right.
the not in my backyard, people
Absolutely.
who just don't want to see any changes in their neighborhood of any kind. And you're living in St. Thomas.
Yeah, and as I was about to say, I've got that own feeling myself. Where I live, the city of St. Thomas is proposing to build a sewage treatment plant within a kilometer of my house. Rather not, but I understand why it needs to be there in some degrees in terms of what the infrastructure is. But I get people in London. It's higher density in an area that was right beside residential housing, single-family homes. I get the pushback. I get why they're resistant.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, a sewage treatment plant, like that's, I would move. I'd move.
Yeah, I'm hoping the wind just
It goes
in the right way. So.
That's the big thing. That's really understandable. But sometimes when I see these neighborhoods, around London, and they want to put in, a walk-up or some kind of multiplex, and people are like, oh, but the context of our neighborhood. I love that phrase.
Right.
What does that even mean? They don't want to change the vibe of the neighborhood and the aesthetic and families. I'm like, grow up. Like, people need homes.
Yes.
And neighborhoods change. The city's growing. We're not living in the 20th century anymore. You can't keep your cute little single-family home and picket fence and everyone cookie cutter on the street. Things change.
Yeah, you're right that London needs to address housing, but in addressing housing, they're also going to have to address basic infrastructure in how people get around, because increasing density without a way to move people around is still going to be problematic on the whole.
That is the big thing, and they go hand in hand. You can't put up more density in, say, Wortley Village, but have no way to get these people downtown to where they work.
Absolutely.
So we've talked about quite a few issues here in London. These are issues that affect you, whether or not you really think about them or not. They're issues that you will encounter or see other people encountering every day. How do you think, in general, how is London doing compared to other cities in our country?
To be blunt, probably about average. If you go to any local media, any reporting from any city in the province, and you're going to get people who are relatively happy, people who are not so much. So, C+, B- is probably where I would rate it at right now, but I don't know if I would rate any municipality in the province as an A, to be quite honest.
That's fair. A B- is still a pass, and at least we're not Windsor. So, for the Interrobang, I'm Jack Sutton. Thank you very much for coming on today, Glenn.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you learned something a little more about your city. All right, so thank you for listening to another episode of the Red Couch Podcast. You can catch up with every episode on our website wherever you get your podcasts. And you can watch the full episodes on our YouTube channel as well. Make sure to pick up a copy of our London local issue of the Interrobang today. For the Interrobang, I'm Jack Sutton.